Welcome to another exciting podcast, Driven Hunter, brought to you by Mission Crossbows. This week we're joined with our good friend John Redmond of Nose Jammer. And John, we go way back, don't we?
We do. It's been a long time.
Oh, since I think 2005 is really when we started hunting together. I actually probably got to know you even before that.
Yep.
Way back in the days when I guided over in Buffalo County for Tom Interbo at Bluff Country
Outfitters. Had to be
Outfitters.
earlier than 2005.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I guess, yeah. It's been, seems time flies, man, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's amazing how way back then, I knew you as a big deer hunter, and you're still in the business. You've taken it to a whole new level, and we're going to talk about how you develop Nose Jammer and stuff as we go on. But what a ride it's been so far for both of us. I mean, and we're still working together and still hanging out. So
Absolutely.
having a lot of fun.
You know it. Had I known what I know now back then,
Right.
that's the thing.
We'd be in a little different position, wouldn't we?
We'd have no more room left on the walls.
Oh, it's crazy. But yeah, today we're going to talk a lot about hunting big deer and how you've learned to fool the noses of some big bucks. And I got to say, after knowing you this long and seeing what you've done with this product and how effective it is, it's going to be fun to kind of dive into this and get your thoughts a little bit more about it and just overall in general hunting, and trying to outsmart these big deer, which you've mastered. I've learned a lot about, that from you, and we've had a tremendous amount of success because of the product since. So let's get started today and, let's talk. Well, hey, why don't we just start out with talking a little bit about the history of where we got started? Because that's kind of cool. Thinking back, I think in 2005 is when I first started hunting with you. I had old Donnie Hansen running the camera.
Oh, yeah.
And we shot a really nice buck up on top of one of your food plots, one of your turnip plots,
Yep.
and you had a water hole there. Mm-hmm. And, I even learned that from you, how effective these water holes have really become and how you used them.
Yeah, and really backing up, I learned the water hole thing from you, and then we started to put them in on my ground. And it works so well because, we're in rugged bluff country and the water doesn't pool. And they have to break cover to get water in most places. So when we put it in those areas, like we learned that they already want to be, it was as strong as a food plot, if not more strong than that during the rut.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit more about, favorite things and favorite tips and tactics to take in big deer. But that time period and when I shot that deer, it's just phenomenal. If you've ever been down and hunted with John in Houston County, he's got a lot of deer and a lot of big deer. And what I could really appreciate about what you've done down there is just your, I guess, strict management plans that you've, set forth and how you've done that. That's just been amazing. Tell us a little bit about, how you built such a deer mecca.
Well, it takes so long to do any of that, as you know. But when I first took over and put all that ground together, which was 4,000 contiguous, it was overpopulated. And I think we rode in a helicopter together a time or two counting them.
We did.
So we knew they were overpopulated, and for the first 4 years, we shot 125 plus does a year, and you were in on that. We had a lot of good times, man. That was fun shooting that many does. And, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You think, should we be shooting this many deer? And really, I knew we needed to take and lower the population. And once we did, there was enough habitat to go around, if you will. And then we started to see the results, 1.5-year-old 10s coming out. Well, we never had 1.5-year-old 10s.
Right.
We were covered up in 8-pointers with short brows when it was overpopulated. So
I remember that. Matter of fact, I think helped clear one of those 8-pointers out.
Yeah, absolutely. And those for some reason are the ones that are beating everybody up. But yeah, I mean, so much of the QDMA strategy is right on, and I've learned that from the beginning. I took over when it was overpopulated. Now I like to think it's well managed. Absolutely got to keep those numbers down, and the quality starts to come through the roof.
You're right. One of the things that you just hit on is taking out those big mature 8-pointers. And, that really seemed like it made a big difference for you because you really targeted them more than you did even a trophy class deer. You're like, hey, you get a chance at taking that big 8 out that has short brows. I mean, let's get him out of there because he was a bully, and he's basically running all those younger bucks with great potential out of there where they're relocating, far away because they don't want to have to deal with that bully in the herd. And once you started taking those deer out and kind of thinning that genetic out of the herd, you started to see a lot more 10-pointers. And case in point, that one year, it was actually the first year I ever took Carson. First day I ever took Carson out in the field. And John said, hey, this is all, your area is primarily just for bow hunting. But John said, hey, if you get a chance, he said, you come down and take out one of these management deers with a gun, I'd appreciate it. So I took Carson out. I thought this is a great opportunity to introduce Carson. I think was 3 or 4 years old. I mean, he's barely old enough to walk.
Absolutely.
And boy, I mean, that's probably one of my most memorable hunts that I still have. And I was just on a management hunt that day, and we went and sat in one of the valleys, and of course the deer started pouring out into the food sources, and eventually here come that swamp buck that that's what you nicknamed him. And he had short brows, and we made a good shot on him. Carson, it was hard to keep Carson in the blind the whole time because he wanted to always peek out of the window. He was so excited. I had a plethora of candy and stuff like that to keep him preoccupied and keep him busy. But it's some of my most valuable footage that I cherish now is just that hunt. But we got rid of that 8-pointer. And then years later, like you said, I mean, the results started showing up. Spinning that ahead, I shot the pincher buck, which was a beautiful, clean, typical with long brows. So, I mean, you went from these short brow tines to, more prominent, brow tines, which obviously make that genetic what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back and talking about those 8 points with short brows, I believe that that's a late fawn that never caught up by the time winter hit, and so he never catches up. And like I said, those, and are the fighters, and many times I would have the turnip plot where you shot your first buck. I'd have a guy come back and say, well, that 8-pointer with no brows run to the edge of the fence every time a buck came near.
Right.
And he'd just run him out of the plot, jump the fence a couple of times, ran the bucks up. So time after time, hunters coming back and telling me how many short-browed 8s are running all the bucks off just kind of confirmed a little more of that they're working against you type thing. But yeah, now the 8-point, I was covered up in them. Now the 8-point with short brows is very rare. So all that management works. It's a leap of faith to go ahead and shoot that many deer. When you're managing a piece of property, you think, boy, I don't know, am I going to have enough does left, and my bucks are going to get up and roam to the neighbor, and they might, but you still have to get your herd balanced and in line to get those genetics, those great genetics to show themselves.
Yeah, it's a sacrifice.
Absolutely.
When you got that larger property, the last thing you want to go in there and you did hunt it right. I mean, you didn't go in there and overpressure the deer to shoot that many deer, but I mean, you hunted them late in the season. We kind of targeted them certain times of the year where you went pressure them off, but it just took a lot of perseverance and just to get to that level.
Yeah,
and
it did. I never thought I would find enough people to help me with it that wouldn't shoot the bucks when they saw them.
Right.
And I had neighbors and their hunting parties join us. And for 3 days, last 3 days of the gun season, we'd have 75 people out there hunting, which you have to be very careful doing. But these people were excellent. They'd have a big buck run by them and wouldn't even think about it. A mistake or two was made with spikes here and there, or nubbin bucks, and that's going to happen. Right. That's just part of the cost. But yeah, great groups of people around me really helped out. Trustworthy farm families,
Well, that's a good segue into what we're going to talk to next, because after managing all these deer and hunting these deer intensively and just targeting big deer over the years, you developed Nose Jammer, and I love to get in a little bit of history to kind of set this up for the viewers, so they don't think we're just trying to sell them some latest and greatest thing. Mm-hmm. But this is a product that when you developed this, you kind of brought me into the fold because we were buddies. Mm-hmm. And we weren't potential advertisers. You were just letting me test this stuff out as a friend. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, I mean, we saw instant results when we started using this. And we were testing it in the field, using this stuff, just seeing if it would cover our scent trail and how we were always getting trailed in to the stand and then in the stand and stuff. And we saw the effectiveness. So give us a little background history on how Nose Jammer got its start.
Mm-hmm. Well, running the operation at the outfitter, just real quick, I was buzzing around like a bee trying to find the right wind. I could get you in on a food plot and water hole setup, which is the premium setup in my country on an interior. I could get you in there on Tuesday night, but the wind wouldn't let us get back in there till Thursday or Friday. And so what was happening was we're creating gaps, and those bucks would get in the gaps, from one day to the next. I know that they don't know what they're going to do. So I'm buzzing around the property like a bee with five guys, trying to find the right wind. And I think, that they get onto that. Obviously they do. But when Nose Jammer came along, things changed pretty differently, quite a bit differently, and for the better. But, really how I got on this idea is I was guiding a hunter, a family friend, in Colorado. We were elk hunting, and we'd blown a setup like you do when you're elk hunting, and we're sitting up against a ponderosa pine, and he strips the bark on it as we're just taking a little break, and he says, "Man, these trees got a sweet smell to them." And I thought nothing of it. I mean, I've been in the woods as much as anybody who chases critters. Right. Pine's a pine, but I did smell that tree, and what I was smelling was something real sweet. I thought, it's got to be maple syrup, and I had no idea if they tap them or not, or if they have maple in them, but that's what I was smelling. And I dismissed it for a little while, but then it kind of came back to me, that idea, and I really started to put some thought into it. 20 years earlier in the hair care business, I had thought of a product like a deodorant stick. You would take this deodorant stick and you wipe it on trees, and then when the critters get around, it would overwhelm their sense of smell, right. Keep them from smelling.
That's what they did smell.
But I had no idea what to use. So when I smelled the compounds coming out of that tree, I merged those ideas and thought, started researching it to back up, and it didn't take any time to find out that trees, shrubs, and grasses emit aromatic compounds. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of when I started to use the hair care contacts and go to the formulator and have them formulate something with these most common compounds that we had found. So the ball started rolling that way, and it really helped having those contacts in the hair care business. I didn't get charged for any R&D, which was huge at that point.
Yeah, so this wasn't just some little basement concoction that you were whipping up and brewing it.
No.
And you were working with, guys that had, chemist backgrounds. Absolutely. And stuff like that knew how to help you formulate the right, stuff.
Yeah, and it truly was the right thing to do, because they started providing me with samples that were really close. And then I would hand out samples to you. I would hand out to some of my hunters that were Florida, East Coast, Texas, and I didn't know if it worked in those places. They took it home after they hunted with me, called me, hey, it works here. So we tweaked it and tweaked it and tweaked it a little bit till we found something that was working everywhere, and critters were not alarmed when they got a nose full of it. Now at that point, as we progressed, what was happening was I was hanging on to the wind, but my guides were telling me, listen, we hunted this food plot and water hole last night, and the wind was swirling, but they didn't run off. And so I'm still hanging on to my 125 stand sites with the wind. I can't do this without the wind. So it took the guides telling me, listen, we should probably hunt that again, even if the wind swirls over, because the does aren't running off in there. And then we kind of started to, because Jammer was doing what it was doing to the critters and keeping them from running off, then what we started to do is use frequency on them. And I really think that's what held us back more in the past is, like I said, I can get you in there Tuesday night, but it's not till Thursday.
Right.
And now what has happened is day number 3 is magic. If I get a guy in camp and we know there's a big buck on this food plot and water hole, if I could just get him to sit there for 3-4 days straight, the buck's going to cycle through. We shot a 180-inch buck a couple years back, but it was such a great example. Had a guy in there. We found the buck on a trail camera. Guide puts him in the tree stand. Sits there the first day. Sits there the second day. After the third morning, he couldn't take it anymore, and I don't blame him. Nothing was happening. But so we didn't lose our frequency. I put the new guy in there. He shot him that night.
Wow.
So,
but that guy, the first guy, was not real happy that he made that decision.
But he's going around not being happy anywhere. That just happens, man.
Yeah.
You got bad mojo sometimes. But point being, had we not manned that position and said, just stay there till he comes back, we wouldn't have got that buck either.
Yeah, one thing I've learned over the years, and I'm sure you can attest to this, is that, when you're playing the wind, say you're hunting with the wind in your face, not necessarily a buck generally doesn't operate on that premise. He isn't going to come in, with the wind, not in his favor. Yeah. So now you're kind of changing the rules by now you're going in there hunting where the wind is more in favor for the deer, and a buck will use that. And when he comes in there, he doesn't have he has his guard up, but he thinks everything is fine because you're not trying to just trick him on wind. You're going in there now with this product, and like I said, when we first started this, or when you first started giving us some of these samples to try out and see how effective they were, I remember exactly the day I was started using it. We were in Illinois hunting, and we're sitting in the tree. It was in the rut, and we had a long walk in, and there's a lot of deer per square mile there. And we're sitting on this long finger ridge, and we had, because it was deep in the timber, we had to walk across a lot of primary trails. And I just was, we were always consistently getting, back trailed all the way to the tree, either by a mature doe or a buck, but, and then they kind of smell around, eventually spot you in the tree and blow the whistle, and kind of kills your hunt for that time period. So when we started seeing deer cross our trail with little to no response of smelling where we had just walked, I started thinking to myself, wow, there is something to this stuff. And of course, you told us, permeate the branches and yourself with it, be fairly, liberal with the stuff. Yeah. And it started, giving us what we need. And then we didn't have to pay attention again to the wind as much. And we hunt just like you do, high concentrations of deer. So you're always going to have deer downwind of you. Yeah. That's just the nature of the beast here where we hunt. So, but it's just really interesting how it kind of got its start. Of course, you mentioned you came from, the hair care business. That's when I was guiding you guys back then.
Yep.
And a lot of people probably wouldn't know that you came from that. It wasn't it the purple Aussie shampoo?
That's what it was.
So if you have, if you see in the purple Aussie shampoo thing, you can think big deer killer John Redmond. That's where you get your start. But years later, formulate and stuff. And of course, now you have shampoos and conditioners all in the line of the nose jammer line that my wife's, she is a Nazi when it comes to, using scent type of shampoos and stuff like that, and how that head of hair can handle it.
Yep.
And she uses your product all the time, not just during the hunting season, but, just controlling that scent and stuff. I mean, way back in the day when I worked for Hunter Specialties, obviously, they had all this, stuff in their line too, from, stuff you wore in your hats, and just, it was always about staying scent free and all this other stuff. They're real adamant about scent.
Yeah, I did the same. We all did the same stuff. That's what there was. That's
right. Yeah. And a lot of people didn't have the capabilities of going out and taking a shower after, before the hunt, because they were leaving work.
Sure. And
it was tight on time. Yeah. So it became a great alternative. I think that's why it's been so successful. Obviously, it works in the field, but other people, I get every once in a while, we'll go to a sports show and somebody will say, I see you use that nose jammer stuff. Does it really work, or is it something that you're just endorsing? Which, TV gets a little bad rap on that, because some people endorse products just, for economic reasons. But that's one thing I like to pride ourselves at Driven. We believe in the products that we endorse and always have. Everybody's been with us since day one. So, but obviously we have to try to fool critters' noses, and that's our game. It's hard to take a wild animal on camera. I mean, they don't read the script.
Right.
They try to keep away from us, but that kind of leads me to the next thing. Is this stuff just made for whitetail hunting, or is it made for other species?
Well, I mean, excuse me, when we first formulated it and started testing it, I didn't know. That's why I sent cans with my guys when they went home. But what I've learned has been tremendous through the course of this. But what I've learned is trees, shrubs, grasses, they all give off aromatic compounds. And it's a lot like a flower gives off a smell. What you're smelling when you smell a flower is aromatic compounds being given off by standing vegetation. But a flower does it at such a high rate, everybody can smell it.
Right.
All standing vegetation give off aromatic compounds. And game are conditioned to being exposed to that. So it does work on every critter with a nose, and it does work everywhere. I had guys buy product, call me and say, hey, I'm going to Africa. Does it work in Africa? I said, I don't know. And when they got to Africa, they were burning cow patties, trying to overwhelm the sense of smell.
Really?
Yeah. And that wasn't working.
Right.
And they hadn't killed, these guys hadn't killed much, and they started using the jammer and started shooting critters right away. So that was interesting because it works that far away. And it's all about the standing vegetation. Anywhere you got standing vegetation, and that's everywhere that critters live. But, one other thing that I've learned has been so interesting is all those critters have a high performance nose, but it's got to be clean. If you blow a puff of smoke on that nose, let's see if they can fight their way out of it. Absolutely can't, as long as that puff of smoke is non-alarming to them. And so really what we're doing is giving them a nose full of what they see every day, and it overwhelms a sense of smell. It's like going into a pizza place. Next time you go into a pizza place, get a whiff of that stuff as soon as you get in the door, and it is strong. Right. After you sit in your chair for a while, waiting for yours to be done, it just wears down. Right. And that's your olfactory just being overwhelmed. And
yeah, the scent is still there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's as strong as it was when you went in the door. And that's really what we're doing to the critters. We're just overwhelming their sense of smell with something that's very common to them.
That's unbelievable. It's a natural product and in its best form.
Well, back to that wind thing. I wanted to back up just a touch because it was so
I was going to ask
interesting.
you. Yeah, let me ask you.
You know,
how do you apply this stuff?
Well, let me back up and I'll tell you how we apply it. But what was going on? What happens now is I'm not playing the wind. And everybody thinks that's crazy except for the people around me. I mean, I've got people that use jammer that still pay attention to the wind. But one of the things with that is it's a double-edged sword. You can play the wind and have things work out right, and play the wind and the other 50% of the time not have things work out right. Sure. And I'll not play the wind and have things work out right. And then, sometimes things don't work out right. I mean, nothing's 100%. But I've figured out that I'd rather be standing in that high percentage spot the whole time that I possibly can and just let the cards fall where they may. Because as much as I know you've done this as much, obsess over the exact right wind, you'll get in there and it'll swirl or a critter will come from behind the tree stand. So there's no right way there. And I think really what we've done is been able to just eliminate that and say we're just going to let the cards fall where they may, and more times than not, they don't snort, they don't run off or anything like that. So the wind is a trick, and it'll keep you out of good hunting areas if you're not careful. How we apply it, let me answer that. A lot of my hunters, as we learned more about this product, have, taught me some neat things about applying it. So we'll spray our boots and pants on the way in. That way, if you cut a trail, they don't go running off. My hunters taught me about spot spraying brush on the way to the stand, and what that does, they're just puff and brush, weeds, whatever, on the way to the stand, and what that does is it strings out that jammer. And then when you get to the stand, you spray the base of the tree. I'll spray that tree's limbs when I'm standing in it, finish up with a sleeve and a pant leg. I really feel like that closes the cloud down. If I was to get in the tree stand and just spray my legs, I'd be leaving the top of myself exposed. So think about creating a cloud that surrounds you.
Right. And then clothes probably keep that scent a little bit longer than if you were to spray it maybe on a branch, or it doesn't dilute it as much.
I think that it just closes everything down. Why leave anything exposed, really? But really what we did when we started out is I was just spraying it on my tree and on myself, and you would create more of a narrow scent cone, if you will. And let's say a mama doe, she'd come in from a right angle, and she'd get her sense of smell disrupted and stop. And then she'd do a double take because the wind's coming from over there, and she's got her sense of smell disrupted. So she's instantly going like this, whether she's alarmed by it or not. And, sitting tight when they do that was key, because they'd go 2, 3 breaths, on about my business. Right. Now what we're doing is spot spraying on the way in. And sometimes if the wind swirls, I'll just hit it and it'll go coat that vegetation over there. And stringing the jammer out means when they start to get close, she already got it on her nose over here. So, I mean, I could have toucans on my tree. Nobody's home when she gets there. So stringing it out and easing that right angle, has created a situation where they're just not alarmed and they're not doing a double take.
So just to kind of clarify, when you're walking to your stand, your spot spraying, I understand that. Do you go past that tree stand location and still spot spray and turn around and come back?
I mean, how many times have you just wanted to sneak to your stand and nothing else?
Right.
So I don't. If I'm on a food plot and nobody's coming and there's nobody around, I'll walk down and make a line. Sometimes the wind will swirl in a direction that you can't walk over to. Just hit it, and it'll carry it all over the vegetation over there. Point being, get creative on how you string that jammer out and get it in their nose as soon as you can. That way when they get near you, it's already in their nose. It's nothing different.
Well, we've even done what we've done here, that when we go out and we'll put out one of our new muddy blinds, we'll stick it out, this is a big permanent blind.
Yep.
I go in there right away. Before we're even sitting in it, when I just set it up,
sure.
I spray it.
Yep.
kind of acclimates them. And one of the other things that I was just thinking of when you were talking about application and stuff like that, there's been multiple times that we've gotten in the tree and, we're probably running late, whatever, and we're in a hurry and we forget to spray.
Yep.
And or for one reason or another, and you're sitting there and all of a sudden you get a doe that just, or a deer blowing at you. Yeah. You're like, oh, then it hits you. Oh, I forgot to spray. So, obviously the stuff is in our pack. We pull it out and we'll start spraying. And I've noticed that, that intensity of that deer being alarmed, they all of a sudden, you can just like count the seconds before that scent stream hits them.
Yeah.
And as soon as they smell that, the alarming sense that they were, giving you earlier, it just kind of, I think it just calms them down and they leave.
Yeah.
Like you said, if it overwhelms their senses of smell or whatever it does, there's been a lot of instances where this has happened to us, and it kind of proves proves the effectiveness of this stuff, and it seemed like it's worked for us amazing. So kudos to you.
Well, spot and stalk, we talked about tree stand hunting, but spot and stalk is very cool. What I've learned about spot and stalk and spider. Look at that, just came down right up on top of us.
Crawled in his microphone.
There's a children's book about that. No, spot and stalk.
It attracts spiders.
Yeah, I don't even have any on. No, spot and stalk is interesting, hunting elk, because really what you do is you spray your front and back. So if I locate some elk with my brother, I'll just cover my binos and he'll spray me front and back and we move in on them. And it has been very interesting how my elk hunting, for instance, has changed. I would get close to a herd of elk, and in the mountains the wind is swirling. I feel like you got about 5-10 minutes, and the wind is going to hit you in the back. So, you end up rushing what you want to do. And now, I've learned to be more patient, because I'll be near a herd, the wind will swirl and run, go right over the top of them, go right in the herd, and nobody runs off. And then you stop and you think, well, wait a minute, just be patient, and you stay with them, whether you're going to stalk them or ambush them or call to them. It just creates a situation where you can afford to be patient. So out west, it has been really interesting how well it works. I can't say it works better, but good gracious, had I had it 20 years ago, you wouldn't have believed the bulls that would pull up at 40 yards after all that work.
Right.
And they would stop, and the wind would swirl, and they're just not doing that anymore, which creates just more opportunity, whether you hit them or not when you shoot at them.
Yeah, and elk, it's just so like you were saying, that wind and stuff like that. Those critters use their noses to travel back to from feed back to their bedding, waiting for the thermals to change and stuff like that.
Sure.
And that, I know you've shot some monster elk, and it's good to know that it works for that as well. I've seen that it really has helped us out on bear hunting.
Yeah.
Because we do a lot of bear hunting, black bear and of course grizzly.
Sure.
Those critters are super keen on their nose.
Them and hogs, I hear. Hogs.
Yeah,
I got the incredible nose too.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
They have their sense of smell is, I think, 3 or 4 times greater than the whitetails.
Wow.
And whitetails is pretty darn good. But for instance, if you walk across a valley and if you go brown bear hunting, they won't even a lot of times let you walk anywhere until you find the bear you want to go shoot, because walking places and leaving your scent around is totally bad, because even if a bear cuts your trail or cuts your scent 3 or 4 days later after you've been there, he's still leaving the country. And we've used this stuff, super effectively hunting in Canada for black bears. Matter of fact, we just went on a spot and stalk hunt up in Alaska, and again, same thing you were just talking about, wind, a lot of wind shifts and stuff because you're hunting right tight to the mountains.
Yep.
I mean, 1 minute it's in your face, the next minute it's at your back. You know, so we were using jammer up there, and Nicole stalked right in. I mean, like within feet of the bear she shot with a bow. It was awesome. And you know what? I mean, there was a couple times where that bear kind of just picked up his head and just went right back to feeding.
Sure.
And I mean, I know he was just testing the wind, but hey, whatever happened. I mean, we got the bear.
Yeah, it worked.
It worked. So.
Yeah, something interesting on the bears is I have a warning on the back of the can, use caution in bear country, and it works like kryptonite on bears. But the reason I put that on the back of the can was just so my hunters could be heads up, because what was happening was these guys had used the product, let's say elk hunting, where there's bears, and they were stumbling up on bears because the bears weren't smelling them when they approached anymore. So you'll be hunting elk, and your wind will go in a certain direction, and if there's a bear in that direction, he'll just run off, and you'd never seen him, so you never knew there was a bear around, period. That's the way they are. But now they're not picking up the hunters, and so it's so effective on bears, it's hard to believe. But I put a warning on the can just for people to be heads up, you know, because when you use that stuff, the bears aren't picking you up anymore, you know, so you just got to be heads up when you're using it, and, you know, keep
you don't want to get caught off guard.
Well, yeah, you don't want to stumble on somebody,
right?
Because before they'd pick you up before you even saw them, and now they're not picking you up anymore. So just a little warning for my guys: make sure they're heads up, you know, keep them safe. But yeah, it works so good on bears, I had to put a warning on it.
That's pretty.
Yeah,
that's
just
stupid.
kryptonite on them. I mean, how many times? I've bear hunted over bait and spot and stalked them. How many times did you just the wind made all the decisions? It was up to the wind. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on is, you know, I hunt with a lot of good hunters. They can shoot. They can get close. They know how to find critters. All the things you need to do. But really what it comes down to is the wind going to allow you to be able to harvest that critter? Like especially elk hunting, for instance. You could hunt for 2 weeks and the wind swirls right before you're going to shoot. So when it comes down to, is the wind going to allow you to do that? That's a tough variable that you just, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like gambling. You don't know if it's going to go well or not. And so it's been great in the regard that the wind really isn't dictating as much what happens anymore.
And I like what you said earlier. I mean, you know, hey, hunting is hunting yet. I mean, there's going to be instances. There's never anything that's 100%. You ain't going to guarantee 100%. But you know, we've all seen the results of it. And what else is? Tell me what else is in the nose jammer line. Obviously, we have the aerosols, and I like, of course, the smaller ones. But you know, I know that you've developed some other products that you come out with recently that also help.
Well, we've got the field sprays. We've got shampoos, laundry, you know, all kinds of things. And they all have that nose jammer smell. And the idea is the more of that nose jammer smell you get on your body, your clothes, the field spray when you're out there, the more effective it is. Now, like I was saying earlier, you blow a puff of smoke on that critter's nose, see if he can fight through it. Well, what's happening with the jammer when you create a cloud is that jammer, if they get in your wind, is constantly blowing at them, and they can't process the jammer and get to you, to your inside. So say I don't shower, you smell. There's no doubt about it. But when you surround yourself with that jammer cloud, they can't fight through it to ever get to your human odor, which is on the inside, because they really can only process one airborne odor at a time, and the jammer's constantly coming on them. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that's really interesting. You create that cloud, and they just cannot fight their way through it to get inside of it to smell your human odor.
That was kind of the premise behind a lot of the ozone product stuff that was out there in the market and still is. They were building, it was encapsulating your scent. This is similar in a different instance that, you know, don't use ozone. But, you know, like you said, it builds that that frontal cloud
That's
that
it.
it helps cover.
Just keeps them from getting to you.
Right, right. So let's talk a little bit. I want to pick your brain because obviously you've been doing this for a long time. Outside of the nose jammer stuff, tell me a little bit about some of your big buck tips and tactics that have really put a lot of deer on the ground. I mean, you mentioned that you've guided a lot of hunters. John had an outfitting business that I started with back in the day called Fair Chase Outfitting, and you don't outfit anymore, but you had a lot of guys that you took out over the years, and had to, of course, guide them into big deer. What would you tell the viewer and the listener that things that work for you that they might not know of?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would have killed a lot of big bucks myself had I not been guiding hunters, but but we had so many great relationships formed and all kinds of things like that. And nobody these days cares if I get one. It's if my kid gets one or somebody else. But well, I don't know. I stand by the fact that I think a big whitey with a bow is got to be the toughest critter. To get, an elk, you could be out west, you could see him cross a valley. I saw him. I've got whiteys, and everybody does, that I've just never seen.
Right.
So I don't know, big buck wise, man. I mean, I like to hedge the odds in my favor with the habitat. Water holes, super big deal. One year we killed 8 out of 12 bucks on water holes. It was a dry year. Some places we brought the water in. And what that did for us is kept the pressure off the other places, the exterior food plots. Let's say a wooded saddle over here and there. We just manned up and sat water every day, all day long.
And these water holes were in the inside of the timber.
Yeah, I mean, they got to be on the inside of the timber. And then to take it a step further, they need to be where the deer want to be and feel safe. And you can get in without buggering everybody.
Right.
But water holes, key. And that made life easy during a drought. Some guys have water on their property. Well, if it's not inside the woods, it's not the same. I mean, you build a lot of water holes.
Yeah, we talked about that. My first deer was off a water hole that I shot at your place, and then Nicole's first deer, her first Minnesota buck. Mm-hmm. It was our first year we were dating. Matter of fact, that helped seal the deal on her. That's why she moved to Minnesota.
It doesn't hurt.
I took her to Johnny's place, and she shot a great big one, like in the second or third day. And it was on a remote water hole up on top of a ridge that had no other water.
Yeah, it had a food plot and a water hole on it, and we would come up the backside and not bugger anybody going in there. We shot 14 Pope and Youngs off that over the history of that little place. And they almost all were walking the same direction, drinking on the same side of the water hole. But, that place was interesting, and talking about, strategies on big bucks, it taught me a lot up there because we ended up just hunting that water hole and food plot and not the point out here or the wooded saddle on the left or the other point on the right. Eventually, we'd just pop into that plot and not hunt the rest of the ground, not hunt the rest of the 200 acres at all because everybody cycled through that water hole. And what was happening was...
It was in a central location.
It was on a ridgetop. Well, what was happening was, as the neighbors started to hunt, they'd push the deer in on me, and we never walked on any of those ridges. And there would be... it would go from 20 deer on there to 50 near the end of the year. And so that really taught me, walking around, bumping them, that does have an effect on them. Absolutely. Wind swirling, and then picking up their nose, looking around, and going back to what they're doing. Not a problem. Actually walking through the woods, bumping them out of there, a little bit of a problem. So some of my areas would load up because we didn't have to walk all over. And we could man that high percentage area for days at a time without pressuring the rest of the ground. Now, small properties, even better. You know what I mean? Even better. Use the jammer. Don't go trouncing all over. Pick a high percentage spot. Leave everything else alone. It's a great little strategy. But, aside from hedging the odds with the habitat, I like that frequency thing, man. I really do, because day number 3 seems like it's magic. If I've got an area and we know he's there and he's drinking out of that water hole, I honestly can't tell you if he's going to show up, whether you got camera or not, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. You just have to sit there like you do in Canada and man it until they do come back. So that frequency thing, that's probably one of my best things that I've learned.
Right. I learned that too.
Yeah.
Hunting with some pretty, stealthy deer
Yeah.
killing machines.
Yeah.
Stan Potts, Greg Millers of the world. Those guys taught me a long time ago that if you see a big buck doing something once,
Yeah.
chances are in the near future he's going to repeat that process because he's old. He's in a routine. He's like, we would be when you get old. I mean, you're just going to feel comfortable. It's safe.
Yeah.
And you're going to keep doing it over and over. And like you said, you put in your time, eventually that buck will repeat itself. And I shot a monster typical this year on the exact same premise. Yeah. Nicole last year shot a buck. We had a deer coming in, multiple times. The cameras told the story, let us know that this deer was on a pattern. Mm-hmm. And all we had to do is get in there and hunt this deer. And like I said, she shot it was the biggest buck on the property last year. She shot him with a bow at 10 yards. And then this year I went in and shot the forky buck on the same pattern, because I knew he would repeat that again at some point in the near future. And sure enough, I mean, that's a great tip. It's just the frequency of it and staying with it and not giving up because, sooner or later they're coming back.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that was one, frequency was one, and hedging the odds with the habitat is two. God, what would a third be?
I remember a big buck that you shot many years ago.
Yeah.
And I kind of know the backstory of it, obviously, because I was around. I had a little history with the deer because I picked up the sheds off a buck that you nicknamed Captain Hook, I believe it was.
That's it.
And, I mean, this is a giant typical with big kind of hooks off his twos. Yeah. And I think he even had one off his three or what. But, I mean, you were playing cat and mouse with that deer for a couple of years, and you established these plots, kind of near those bedding areas. And I've learned that from you is how you built these interior, plots to become basically kill plots. Mm-hmm. And how you've protected them and kept deer from over browsing them and stuff like that. Just give us a little thought on how you're, manufacturing these little interior plots.
Yeah, I like clover first of all because you just got to trim it for a couple of years, so that's great. But oh God, I used to have 20 plots. I think it was 20 interiors. I mean, in my country, I really like a water hole food plot scenario. I've got most of them on tops. I've got a few in the bottoms. The ones in the bottoms are tougher to get to because critters just are gonna see you. That's it.
Plus, there's water in the bottom of our valleys because of creeks and stuff.
Yeah, and
so
mine are very water free. There's not a lot of water, which really makes my water hole strong. But I don't know. I like those food plots on the inside. I like to get rid of all the trees around the edges so you don't get any drip, and it's not shading your food plots. But
what size are we talking? An acre?
Yeah,
half acre?
Yeah, I mean, half acre. Make sure it's just clover, or it'll all be gone. If it can be an acre, 2 acres, some of mine are 2.5, even better. But very strong. I like them on top. I say on top because you and I live in bluff country, but they're easy to get to. I mean, I can swing into most of my interiors on top, not bump one. So I like them on top. In the bottom, it works. I'd be careful going in on the bottom ones. No problem on the top ones. I've got ones on the top. We could hunt them every day.
Because the deer have to come up and go to you.
That's the whole trick.
I learned
come up because they can't hear you over the edge.
Right.
It's great.
And they're bedding out on these ridges, and they got their own little, honey holes that they know that they can see anything, coming up from the bottom. And generally they have the wind, at their back. Learned that a long time ago. But interestingly enough, we live in bluff country, and I always tell people, I say, I think that this area, the driftless area, with these bluffs and stuff, is probably one of the, if not the toughest spot to kill a big mature whitetail, because they just have so much going on in their advantage, to beat you, whether it's visual, whether it's wind, whatever. Just hunting them low can be a challenge. I know that, you've said this many times. If you're going to hunt them and you hunt them low, you're going to hunt them early, when the vegetation is on that blocks their view, or you hunt them later on when, it's inclement weather where it's rain and snow, where they have an issue with visual as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, the bottoms can be great, and I've got some really good spots in the bottoms, and we've killed some bucks in the bottoms. And what I like about hunting a bottom is when you're using that jammer, it swirls. And when it swirls in the valley, and they were sitting up on a hillside, they already got it in their nose a long time ago. But no, I do dig hunting those bottoms. What was I going to say about? Oh, I was going to say about the rough bluff country. Well, they hide over the edges, on those edges, and what happens is if you try to come over the top on them, they go down. If you try to come underneath them, they go up. But those big bucks will get to just not moving at all, and they'll stay on those side hills and they won't stand up. I mean, I've had guys for years in tree stands all week long, and they'll come back when they're not moving, and all 5 of them will say, didn't see anything, sometimes for days, buck-wise. And that's not because everybody was in the wrong spot. That's because they didn't stand up. If they stood up, you'd see some of them. That's so right. I think these big bucks, for a fair amount of the time, are just laying down. And you sit there and scratch your head and go, what did I do wrong? Well, he's got to stand up for you to even get a crack at him or see him.
Yep. Well, in our country, too, there's such a thing called acorns.
Yeah.
So one of their primary food sources becomes, as soon as that wind knocks those acorns down, we see a big transition to where deer leave the open agricultural fields and food sources, and all of a sudden become kind of obsolete. I mean, they just disappear, and you're like, where did they go? Yeah. And turns out they're in the timber, they're laying down. They stand up and eat right there and lay back down.
That's
and
it.
There's no movement. So they're not traveling any distance from bed to feed. They're right there. And to hunt them at that time becomes super difficult. And, one of the things that we have learned, and I know you practice the same thing, let the deer come to you naturally, but you provide them an alternative food source, which is clover in the interior, whatever, and a water hole. Yeah. Now you've got 2 drawing cards versus just one.
Right.
I've said that a lot to people. I'm like, why these water holes have become so effective, and this turned into more of a water hole podcast. But, it becomes a multiple drawing card, and I create mock scrapes and everything else that gets the deer into that. I don't care if they're coming there for the mock scrape, the water, or the clover.
Yeah.
I just want them coming there.
Yeah.
Chances are when they come in there, they're going to go to the water anyways because it's right there. So, let the deer come to you.
I think that's all I can do when the acorns fall is sit on water. I think that's all I could do. And if I had the choice between water and food, I would take water in my country every time. But, I really think that's all that you have sometimes because they're so tight to those oaks. They're going to get up and drink. They got to drink. They don't necessarily need the clover because they're filling up on the acorns, but they got to drink, man.
Right. You know what? Interestingly enough, I don't think you even know this, but one of the places that we kill a lot of our big deer is like a 30-year-old pine plantation. So the entire top of this ridge is all pine trees and some walnut trees intermixed. There is no oak trees. So, people ask us all the time, how are you shooting these big deer, during the October lull? When generally everybody's frustrated because these deer are primarily feeding on acorns. I have none. Why? Because it's all pine trees. Yeah. My primary food source is during that period is not, acorns, it's going to be clovers and other things that is abundant there in that particular area. They can still go and, of course, drop over the side of the ridge or, go across the valley and find white acorns. There's no doubt about it. But they feel safe. They've never been bothered where they're living. They just changed their diet. And we've seen it so many times where, a deer will eat a while and eat off a certain food source, but then it's almost like he gets his fill and he'll go to another food source, or he'll leave the food source. It's just because they're going to eat a variety of different things.
Yep. Absolutely. And green when it's warm, grain when it's cold.
Good point.
We learned that one.
Right. That's a big one up here.
Yeah.
Like you said, you like clovers. This year we planted Roundup Ready alfalfa. And of course we've planted a ton of brassicas. It took years, for our animals to kind of get on eating turnips and stuff like that, and radishes. But we've planted evolved shot plot for years, and it becomes a food source early season, of course, and then late season it's the only thing green, and of course the deer just mow it. They really they go for that stuff. So
you almost can't stand over it enough because it'll be gone if you don't have enough.
Oh, right. Remember that time that I was out at your place and you had a brassica plot, was a strip that it ran all the way out on your ridge, and there was a buck coming out there, and we were at the house having lunch, and all of a sudden you looked out and you're like, that big buck is out there in the middle of the day. So like, well, what are we going to do? And she said, well, let's get after him. So we went out there, and he was still in the plot. We ran him off with the vehicle, got set up in the blind, and half an hour later, boop, he come right back out. And I shot at him and missed him because I hit the blind. It was one of them wood blinds you had back then.
Yeah.
My broad had hit that wood, and lucky it didn't deflect and take me out. But and then that buck, after he ran off, he turned around and come back again. That proved to me, I'm like, wow, that stuff was really working. So
absolutely. And those old bucks, man, their teeth are, getting old like they are. So that brassica, they glom onto it when it's late.
Right.
I remember the big 8 we had out behind the house. You just couldn't get him shot. But then he got old enough, and he was probably 8, I don't know, maybe even 9 by that point. You had some brushes with him, but he couldn't stay out of the brassica. His teeth were getting old, and I don't think he was into the corn. Like, he just couldn't eat it like he normally did, and he had to eat,
Right.
And the brassica was really what ended up being his demise.
Oh, you know what? We've had so many memories hunting at your place, and of course, I got to tell a few of the funny stories too, because there is, if you go to John's place, it's very colorful. If his wife Katie she leaves an everlasting impression on you. But John has he has a whole basketball team of kids, and I remember one time, John, when I pulled into your place, and not to be, don't make this sound bad, but I had laughed my butt off so hard because your wife had just got a brand new pearl white Escalade.
Yeah.
And your kids decided it needs some pinstriping. So they were out there with a permanent black magic marker, and it wasn't really a straight line they were drawing. I mean, it was just like kid marks. There was big swirl marks all over the side of your car. And John came out there, and you looked at that, you're like,
yeah,
turn around and just walked off.
Yeah. That's why when you're on a dirt road and you got a lot of kids, you get ranch trucks. I learned my lesson.
Oh.
Yeah. No, they've done some incredible things. That they have not done anything like I did when I was a kid. I wrecked some of my dad's trucks and sunk his bass boat. And I can't tell you, but I've put that right back the way it was. But
well, why
he didn't kill me, I don't know. These guys haven't scratched the surface. They did duct tape Kate's car. I think it was last year. That was the big smart thing to do, is duct tape. When you pull the tape off, though, there's the problem. Is that residue? Yeah. So we had to bring it in. Somebody had to get it removed. Oh, I don't know.
Well, one time we're at John's place, and I don't know, we came in for lunch, and Kate was making some pizzas, or John called them Zaz, and we were watching football or something, and all of a sudden, I'm like, my phone had fallen down in the crack of the couch,
Yeah.
and I started digging down there for it. I kind of picked up the cushion, and I looked, and there's my phone, but there by my phone is a big diamond ring, Kate's, engagement ring or wedding ring or whatever it was.
Sure.
I looked at it, I'm like,
Yeah.
what is this, Kate? She's like, oh my God. She said, I've been looking for that for a month, and John don't know it's missing.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh. I don't think I ever told you that.
Yeah.
So no.
No, believe it or not, it's gone for good now. Well, somebody's going to come up with that one.
Oh, yeah. And one time I was out at John's, and I was practicing. And I know we're telling a lot of stories, but they're some of the most memorable. I was out practicing shooting my bow. And, of course, on the shed there, beside the shed, you don't mow there. So the grass is a little taller. And I was walking along going to get my arrow. And I look down, and there's a brand new set of binoculars laying there in the grass. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I call him, bringing it back to John. I'm like, are you missing something? He's like, that's where them things went.
Oh, yeah. That's like, I'm getting it all back, my dad says. I would leave his tools all over the yard. Oh. And then they're leaving all my stuff all over the yard. So I don't know. I'm trying to be patient with it, and nobody's lost any fingers or anything yet, so we're good.
What the cool part is, though, your kids are getting older now, like ours, and they're into the hunting stuff, and they're helping you. We see them at the trade shows, which is pretty cool. Yeah. You brought up some good kids, even though they've had a few bumps in the road. Yeah. But that's what it's about, getting the kids out there and getting them involved.
It is. My son Tyler, he, what is he, 16 now? Yeah, he got in a stand last year, one that he knows of, called a buck in. Buck comes up, stopped, finished him with a grunt behind him, got him to take those few extra steps, hard shot him. Kind of put it all together. He's much bigger than I am, and he's pulling 70 pounds with like a 30-inch draw, so he shot a doe through the shoulders or something, just trying to test what he's got kinetically. And I said, listen, this is a great shot, but don't shoot, near the shoulder anymore. So I got, of course he's going to shoot through the shoulder again. You know what I mean?
Oh, so yeah, you got to learn, right?
Made a good shot on this buck. I don't know if he shot through the shoulder or not, but we've had a good time. What's cool about raising them in the country is they just, in the summertime, will go out and they'll just, once they get out of bed, sometimes they'll just have their underwear on and put a pair of sandals out there and go shoot the BB gun. Right. No neighbors around, and so that's a pretty cool upside that they can really hone their hunting skills living in the bush.
Not many people get to grow up in that kind of environment, and it does definitely molds them.
Absolutely
gives them that experience that a lot of kids don't.
Well, you can always go get a little bit of city, but
right?
It's hard sometimes to get that element that the country teaches you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think that's what kids are lacking nowadays.
Absolutely.
There's too much of that digital world in their face, and they ain't getting enough time outdoors. So just before we're wrapping up, John, what's next for Nose Jammer?
Well, what we're doing is working on producing products that fit in the Nose Jammer lane, if you will. What my goal is here is to stay in my lane and just produce products that help jam the sense of smell. Products that I would use. If the next few products that we're working on are really stellar, and people are going to dig them, but if it's not something I'll turn the car around and go get if I forget, we don't want to bring it out. And that's what our goal is just to keep producing products that jam the sense of smell in many applications, and produce products that do what they say, and stay in my lane. You won't see us making arrows. I won't be making triggers. You know what I mean? And things like that. We'll stay in our lane and just produce things that overwhelm the sense of smell, help people get close, get close shots, more opportunities.
Well, hey, I can appreciate that, and we look super forward to using that product. And I want to thank you today for helping us out here, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again.
My pleasure, buddy. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me.